Good evening. My name is Rodrecas Davis, and you are tuned in to Inside Voices, a conversation about mental health, self-care, and the creative impulse. This conversation is presented as part of the Many Rooms, The South Has Something to Say exhibition on view at the Masur Museum of Art. This exhibition features the work of Benicia King, Vida Shell, Kayshana Hall Davis, and myself as part of the Black Creative Circle. And one or two of the general themes that runs through all the work is representation, and on some level, the idea and the need for self-care and what that looks like in Black and Brown communities. I'm joined this evening in conversation with Junior Love, a musician, a singer, songwriter, and a MSW, Master of Social Work candidate at LSU. We're also joined by Ms. Raven Thissel, CEO of Thissel Consulting and the PR director of the Doug Williams Center at Grambling State University. How are you all doing this evening?
Doing great.
Thank you for joining us on this almost late Friday evening. I know that, on days like today when people are usually worn out from a week of work, the last thing they want to do is get online and talk to a bunch of strangers. But I think that our conversation will be instructive, hopefully, enlightening, and maybe a little bit of entertainment as well. So I want to start with an icebreaker of sorts, just to kind of get us in the mood for chatting and to make things hopefully a little bit lighter before we get into the heavy stuff. There's this thing called the Proust questionnaire, associated with Marcel Proust, the French philosopher. It is given to celebrities and all manner of entertainers as part of these, broad interviews that they give. And most of the questions in that questionnaire are heavy existential things, but every now and again there are a few simple softballs thrown in. One of those softballs is, what word or phrase do you most overuse? It sounds heavier than I thought it would be.
Do you want to go first, Junior?
I'll go first. I feel that the word that I most overuse is weird. So I have a tendency to kind of self-judge and just kind of overly use the term weird. And it's just like everything that I either don't understand or want to understand further, I'm just like, that's weird. And it's like, is it really weird? Probably not, but I'm going to use the word anyway.
All right, I'll go with that. I've been guilty of saying it one too many times to students, and it makes me sound like I'm being kind of judgmental. A lot of times because I feel like students do a bad job of explaining themselves. And so I need to probably take a beat and try to understand what it is they're saying before I say that what they're saying is weird.
I can imagine saying that to students.
Yeah, there are plenty of opportunities where it presents itself for me to say it. And so I have to catch myself.
For sure. I definitely overuse the phrase, do you know what I mean? Or does that make sense? I'm always, because I go on these tangents and I'm working on that. And then I loop it back to the idea. I'm thinking 50 thoughts at the same time, and I'm sharing them in a way that makes sense to me. But I want to make sure that in all my sprinting that I'm not losing the person that I'm talking to.
Mm-hmm.
So I ask that question probably more than anything else.
Cool. I think the word that I probably overuse the most is cool. Now that I think about it, it's a way for me to pivot to whatever it is I'm thinking about saying next. And usually I don't always mean that everything that has been said previously is cool. It's just the first thing that comes out of my mouth. And I don't know why that is. I need to, probably, spend some time thinking about that. But, in the process of trying to have multiple conversations between students, faculty, and peers, it's hard for me to always switch in between, the level of conversations that I'm having with those individuals. And so cool is just one of those things that comes out of my mouth while I'm in the process of thinking about what I'm going to say next, as opposed to saying or huh. I say cool, which is probably going to wind up being a problem at some point. I'm gonna have to expand my vocabulary again and start talking to some more adults.
I think it probably comes up a lot because the type of work that you do for a living is so cool.
Oh,
You're
well,
constantly
we
involved.
think that is cool.
Yeah, you're constantly involved with art and artists and cool people and cool experiences. So I think that's probably a good word to overuse.
Well, I'm gonna go with it. I'm gonna say you gave me permission. And
That's a beautiful positive spin on that. I like that.
Exactly. All right, so let's do this thing. Is it okay for me to give you some numbers first before we start with the questions? Because I think to some degree the numbers help to frame, the broad scope of the conversation that we're going to be having. The National Alliance on Mental Illness reports, as of 2021, 715,000 adults in Louisiana have a mental health condition. That's more than 3 times the population of Baton Rouge. More than half of Americans report that COVID-19 has had a negative impact on their mental health. In February 2021, 47.5% of adults in Louisiana reported symptoms of anxiety or depression, and 18.6% were unable to get needed counseling or therapy. What do you think that says about the state of Louisiana, about the state of mental health in the state of Louisiana, and how COVID may have exacerbated some of those issues that people were already dealing with? Junior, we'll start with you.
So I think that it says that Louisiana has a lot of work to do. I think it says that there needs to be a conversation about mental health and the accessibility of mental health, because while we do have many mental health clinicians, there's people that don't necessarily have access to mental health, and the accessibility of mental health in general is a big problem that stops people from getting the help that they need. And then I know with COVID last year, a lot of mental health clinicians were kind of overwhelmed with the response, of trying to meet the need that people had when it came to seeing a therapist or being involved in a mental health treatment plan. So there's a lot of different areas that are, blocking people that need accessibility to mental health services.
All right, Raven?
The first thing I think about is just that Louisiana is one of the poorest states in the country, and mental health treatment is usually something that's viewed as an extra thing. It's something you do if you have extra money, extra time. It's not necessarily prioritized as a foundational need for the layperson. And so I think the fact that Louisiana sees such high numbers in every category that you named, it leans on that knowledge and that understanding that Louisiana is pretty impoverished compared to most places. And Louisiana is late, but for that reason, in its prioritizing of mental health treatment. And I would also just mention how sad it is. These are, when I listened to the numbers, I couldn't help but think this is the number of people who have been diagnosed. And how much of the Black community particularly goes undiagnosed because these conversations are not being had, these questions are not being asked because it's just not okay to ask them for a variety of reasons. They don't come up in our spaces enough. So I would totally echo Junior in that Louisiana has a long way to go.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, when we first were pushed out of the classroom and into the work from home space, and how many students immediately, seem to be showing some sort of, signs of struggle because number one, everyone was thrown into the tailspin, but people were forced to go back home or whatever they called home. And we have this illusion of, students come to campus under the guise of, this pursuit of knowledge, but some students are also coming to campus to get away from home because home is not a safe space. And so you have people stuck in a space where they're surrounded by people who may not necessarily have their best interests at heart, and they're already dealing with their own particular, struggles and trauma. And then to be in a place where they have COVID, stacked on top of that for a year and a half, and then to be, pushed back out into the world, it exacerbates a lot of the issues that people already have. And as stated, people are not dealing with their mental health prior to that, and so it just becomes a factor that's multiplied. It's disturbing because we still see the lingering effects with students. We, on top of the fact that we had a whole bunch of students who wound up losing friends and family members due to COVID. And so all those things, wind up being exacerbated. It's a terrible thing, especially when you think about the state of healthcare in America, or the lack of healthcare in America, on top of the lack of mental health care, right? It's distressing in a lot of ways. And, for one of the richest nations in the world, it's a conversation that we really shouldn't be having, I think. But it's our reality. Speaking of, self-care, and correct me if I'm wrong, but both of you are in grad school, pursuing graduate degrees. You're
Yes.
working full time.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're creatives.
Yes.
So how does self-care factor into your plan, to your day-to-day existence? And if it does, what role does creativity play in your self-care, your form of creative expression?
Well, I think when I think about self-care, I put it into that umbrella, under the umbrella of what I call mental hygiene and emotional hygiene. Sometimes the term mental health can be scary and seem so inclusive that it can be a little overwhelming. But when we think about hygiene, we know that's broken down into different things that we have to do on a consistent basis to really take care of ourselves and not be stinky, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, that self-care piece is linked to that hygiene, emotional and mental hygiene. So for me, that might look like taking some time to write every day, consistently, prioritizing that time, and being unapologetic about the priority of those hygiene rituals. I would never apologize for brushing my teeth. And so I treat the creative outlets are definitely a part of that, but there's also, meditation. I would never sacrifice the meditation time. People who know me know that before I come to an event like this, don't call me an hour before this. I'm doing my things that I need to do. And so I think, self-care definitely must include that creative part for me. And I think that a lot of people don't include any type of creation or art into their self-care plan because they say to themselves, I'm not creative. I hear people say that all the time. And I try not to get on this soapbox, but since you've invited me here.
That's what we're here for.
It's all yours. It's all yours.
So we are all creators. We are all creators, whether we realize it or not. We are all creating our lives. We're creating every aspect of the things that we involve ourselves in. We're creating meals. We're creating conversation. And so being mindful that all the things that we create are things that are healing and rejuvenating to ourselves. There are some conversations where we're creating angst. We're creating anxiety, we're creating anger, we're creating fear for ourselves and for the person that we're conversing with. Conversation is a creative space. It's an opportunity for us to create bliss, to create gratitude, and if we begin to shift our thinking into that, every aspect of our day-to-day has an opportunity to be self-care, then we'll see a lot of transformation, I believe, in the mental and emotional wellness space, especially in the Black community.
Cool. Junior?
Well, being a graduate candidate, working full-time, and also being a creative that's actively releasing art self-care is essentially, it's essential. There's no question about it. And it has to be viewed as, like you said, hygiene. It's like a need. You can't go without it. There's no shortcut to it either. And if you do take shortcuts, you will see an impact in your mental health, your physical health. And a lot of research shows that self-care is very essential to just being, not only happy, but just overall, being well. And for me, art plays a big part in my self-care, just because it's one of my outlets. It's one of my creative outlets, but also my emotional outlet. And when I don't have that, I can definitely see the difference in how I interact with the world. And if I'm interacting with the world in a negative way, then I know that something about how I'm taking care of myself, which is essentially self-care, is not right. It's not in place, and I'm not doing enough to be a little more proactive in my time and prioritizing that time for me. And so I've noticed that, if I'm angry or upset and I put it in a song, I feel so much better. And then if I don't create for a long time, it's like this built up anxiety and, depression sometimes. And it's almost like I have to create. It's the thing that works for me. But I do agree with you, Raven, that a lot of people don't understand that they are creatives. You don't have to release on a big platform to do something creative. You don't have to have a giant canvas to be creative. You can work with what you have. You can be creative in different ways, at home, outside. I mean, most of us have a smartphone. You can take pictures. You can go online and look at those Pinterest pages and create all kinds of mood boards. And there's just so many things that you can do to fulfill yourself creatively, that you have to kind of honor your space and, take ownership of that creativity that you bring into your life, but other people's lives as well.
Cool. Thank you. I think it reminds me of a couple of different things. The first being that we wound up having a similar conversation with freshman students in the program, especially in the intro drawing class, because a lot of students will come in and say that I can't draw. And 9 times out of 10, we know that everyone can draw, but the bigger issue is that you're in the class to learn how to draw, because we can teach you how to do it. We have, in a lot of, not just students, but just in the general population, people have this self-defeatist attitude. And a lot of that is based on the way that we're taught about the way that we can access certain things, that certain things are not for certain people. And so therefore it's not something that I can do. And people have crafted a way of thinking about what also is a manifestation of real art. And we know that that's tied to, colonial, patriarchal ideas, classist ideas about what is real art and what is not. And so that is one of the things that also interferes with people's ability to see themselves as creators. And so we have to, take the time to try to build them up to get them to the place where they're, feel comfortable with making the kind of things that they want to make as forms of expression and being comfortable in that. And that takes a lot of work. It's almost, it's like the same conversation about getting people to understand that their point of view and their personal experience is worth, evaluating and taking care of as part of their mental hygiene. It's work to get some people to understand that. But, that's part of the job of being a functioning adult. We're all working to stay on that path in some form of fashion. It also makes me think about this clip that I saw on the news recently about the Harlem School of the Arts. And, the director made a pretty poignant statement saying that we don't teach, people math because we expect everyone to become mathematicians. We teach them math so they can be well-rounded human beings, in the same way that we should think about, people being exposed to the arts. And I think that, a lot of people still think about art, or the arts in plural, as some value added, elitist kind of thing. And it's not something that's integral. And that starts to phase out the further we get through, public education. It's like art is something that's reserved for a certain kind of person, and that everyone else needs to focus on these things. So I say that to say that, we tend to think about art as a magical kind of thing, as a cathartic, instantaneous, therapeutic thing, which it can be, but making things also comes with its own kind of emotional burden. And so, there's the flip side of that. You're using this thing as a form of expression, but it could also be something that keeps you tied to some ideas that you're trying to free yourself from. And I think that a lot of artists don't think about that because they're so used to working with a particular subject matter, and they don't realize the kind of weight and baggage that comes with that work, especially if you're making artwork that's about a quote unquote heavy topic. And it's a common thread through all the work that you make, right? And so that's something that a lot of artists, wind up becoming encumbered with, and you see that affecting them mentally. There's a long history of artists suffering, various types of mental issues, being committed to asylums, or unfortunately taking their own lives because they haven't dealt with whatever kind of trauma was a part of their creative process, or whatever they spun into their creative process. And so that's one of the reasons also that I wanted to have this conversation, because I know that there are plenty of artists that still kind of exist in that mode, especially with the pursuit of professionalism. And so artists keep using the same material, the same subject matter as a way to achieve a goal, and not understanding how that is a reflection of the life that they live or where they come from, and how they need to interrogate those things.
Wow. That's so profound to me. I never thought about it that way. Never.
Well, we have two good examples. William H. Johnson suffered mental health issues. Jacob Lawrence, of course, Vincent van Gogh. Jacob Lawrence, famously states that he wasn't at the point where Vincent van Gogh was. He recognized what his traumas were, with his parents separating and growing up in poverty, and he wanted to deal with that. And so he made the initiative to tackle that. He checked himself in to the facility, and found some respite there. But not everyone has that kind of foresight or the will, because as stated, we're talking, while we're talking about mental health, we're also talking about specifically Black and brown and other marginalized communities, and how those conversations are not afforded. Which brings me to my next question. Some people may be asking why we're talking about mental health as it specifically relates to those communities. So, would you like to elaborate on why we are having a conversation about Black and brown communities, and the need for more discussion around mental hygiene, as opposed to a broader conversation about, mental hygiene in the United States?
I will go first, if that's all right. The Black community in America, and really the African diaspora, has a very specific and unique set of historical traumas that contribute to the current mental state of the collective. And so for that reason, there is a need to tap into the specific barriers that the Black community has to getting the appropriate support for mental and emotional health and hygiene. So conversations like these open the door for more conversations, even if those conversations are internal for a listener. Do I have mental hygiene? I've never thought about that before. Singing as a form of release, and songwriting. I've never thought about my work in that way as a part of my toolkit. So having conversations that open the door for these types of questions are exactly the things that infuse the understanding about why we need it, what it is, and break down stigmas on a personal and individual level. Does that make sense?
It does, because actually I was going to talk about the stigmas that are attached to mental health in Black and brown communities, because we do have a lot of stigmas that create blocks within conversations. When you go to have a conversation about mental health within Black and Brown communities, the first thing that you hear is, oh, they're crazy, or that's crazy, or that doesn't exist, or they need to go pray, they need to go seek, they need to go to church, or they need to just, there's a lot of judgment and stigma around mental health in the Black and Brown communities, which stops the conversation. It makes the conversation something that is filled with shame. And the research shows that shame is really, really detrimental to mental health in many ways. So when that shame gets brought into the conversation, those conversations stop, and they don't allow the person or the individual to grow and ask the questions that need to be asked and seek out the help that needs to be sought. So I think it is very important that the conversations ignite more conversations and bring more insight on both an individual level, but also on a wider scale.
Yeah, I was driving into work the other day, and I was thinking that, this is part of the broader conversation about all the things that, Black folks don't talk about, or that Americans just don't talk about, because we're all supposed to be resilient, we're all supposed to be strong, everybody has to get up and do their 9 to 5, and no one has time to be the weak link in the family or in the household. You don't have time to have mental, hygiene issues, right? You don't have time to be sick in general, right? And so people aren't talking about the things that affect them personally and whatever those traumas may be, whether it be some sort of abuse or just, some sort of, internal stress that they're dealing with that they want to share or need to be able to share. And they don't know that their grandparents dealt with those same exact issues, but they kept them buried inside, which predicated to them having hypertension or being abusive to a spouse or to themselves in some form or fashion. And so, we have all these things that are bottled up and kept inside and not being able to be shared with the people that we should be able to share them with, which are the people that are closest to us. Which brings me to another question. There's a saying that you can't heal in the environment that you got sick in. So let's say that a person is in the process of trying to do the work, they're trying to get on the path to mental health, they're trying to work on their self-care, they're acknowledging whatever their triggers and traumas are, but they're still surrounded by people that are not helping facilitate that progress. What would you say to an individual who needs to make a substantive first step to actualize, that part of their journey?
I would actually say that it's all about creating healthier boundaries. I don't necessarily agree with the idea that you can't heal in the same environment that you got sick in. I do think that there is some truth to that to a certain extent, but I also believe very much that by creating healthier boundaries around the people that you are around, that you can actually heal, but also impact the other people around you as well. So, being able to tell family members or friends, no, this is important to me. No is a big, that's the biggest one right there, because we get taught very, very early that no is almost disrespectful. It's one of those words that kind of, we don't have a right to say no. There's just this, like, this shame around the word no. But also, by creating those boundaries, we can stand up for ourselves and kind of separate what is our own and what is around us. The problems that are around us aren't necessarily our problems to begin with. They may just be a symptom of something greater that we're a part of. So by creating those healthy boundaries, you start to see that, maybe I'm not necessarily, a problem, or that there's something wrong with me, but that there's something wrong with this system, the family dynamics. And I play a small part in this, but I am not the problem myself. And so by separating that and being able to see it while you're in it, I think that's a lot more powerful and stronger for an individual than say cutting off all communication with the family and then, having to experience that on your own. In certain situations, that might be necessary for someone that's in danger, but in most cases or many cases, just simply developing healthy boundaries, being able to say no, being able to dictate what is your space and what is their space, being able to make your own decisions and be informed about those decisions. I think that says a lot more than necessarily getting out of the space that created that sickness, because we're all ultimately responsible for our own mental health and our own progress.
All right. Raven?
So many good juicy points. I couldn't agree more. I don't necessarily subscribe to the entire idea that you can't heal in the same environment that you got sick in. You can heal anywhere. And I think that sometimes the place where you were hurt can be a beautiful launch pad for what's next for you. And also, it gives you a benchmark for your own healing process. Like, you get to see firsthand, I'm not responding to this the same way that I used to respond internally. You get to gauge a difference between where you started and where you are now and where you want to go next. And then you also have the opportunity to learn exactly what Junior was saying about setting boundaries. What better place can you learn to set boundaries than in the very place where you were taught that you didn't have any, or that you were taught that they were violated? Or I saw this quote that said, people in your family often treat you the way, for your entire life, the way that they treated you when they had the most control over you. And so when you're a young, and I'm thinking about this from, hometown family environment being the source, but there are other, obviously, ways that can play out. But if it is in that family setting, this gives you the opportunity to create mental and emotional space, to know how to carve yourself out as different, and how to preserve also the aspects of the culture of that environment that you find valuable. How can you break those generational curses if you're not necessarily aware of what they are? And how can you preserve your culture if you're not aware of which parts of it are really my culture and which parts of it are trauma responses that are passed down generationally? And educating yourself in that way, there is the pain of separation, right? There's the pain of people saying that you've changed, you're different, you're weird, to steal your word. And, there's a lot of fear of your own authenticity in that environment. But when you develop the strength of cultivating your authenticity, cultivating your no and your boundaries in that environment, what can stop you in the next place? Like, when it is time to move on, when you've grown as far as you can grow in that environment and you're ready to go to the next thing, you now have a profound sense of who you truly are, in spite of the things that you've gone through and because of them.
Cool. I agree. I think, because of everything that you all said, this idea that no being a complete sentence, it is a lot more difficult for people to utter and mean, than people realize. It comes effortlessly for some folks because they're not worried about whatever the consequences may be on the back end. But for some folks, saying no, is anathema. It really feels like, they're letting people down, especially if it's in a work environment or in a family environment where people are dependent upon you, and you feel like no means that you're not giving your part to the collective effort. And that being able to say no doesn't really register with a lot of people with regard to drawing boundaries in the way that we're talking about with regard to self-care and mental hygiene. It's like no is not one of those things that people think about. But the older that you become, it becomes evident that it's important for you to be able to say no and stand on it. Because otherwise you'll always wind up being the one that people call on to say yes. And then you'll never have a minute to yourself to do anything, let alone, work on mental hygiene. It's much more difficult than it should be. And I'm sure there are a lot of other societal factors that have to do with being an American, being in the Western world, as much as it is that we drill down on what it means to be an individual in a family where saying no is frowned upon. Right. So that brings me to another. Go ahead.
I wanted to just interject on the topic of no, specifically for the Black community, how important that is, because it's an agency that since we were brought to America, we never had. No was not trained, it was not allowed. And so, you know, having boundaries for the Black community is something that's new for us. And millennials are ushering in this conversation for the first time in American history. For the first time in Black history, millennials are creating spaces for us to have discussions like this around mental health, for us to teach our children to say no to us. And you know, things like that are revolutionary for the Black community specifically. And those are exactly the types of tools that are going to make mental wellness more normalized in our community. So loving no.
Yes. Yes, but no.
But no.
We practice it when we get up in the morning, right? Say it 100 times like Paul Mooney before you walk out the door.
Oh no.
Say it and mean it. Say it with your chest, right?
No.
So that brings me to another question, another series of questions. Thinking about family structures and the things that we inherit, whether they be, intentionally or unintentionally, corrosive to one's self-development. What are your thoughts about the role that respectability politics plays within the family dynamic and within, Black and Brown America with regard to people establishing their own authenticity and being able to be able to carve out a path for themselves where they can say yes or no to whatever they want to, and to be weird if they choose to, right? To actualize the self. We have these ideas, as stated, about these apprehensions that we have in our communities about being able to say or do a particular thing because we think people are going to look at us askance if we move in a particular kind of way. So I know that we're in a space in 2021 where people seem to be much more open-minded and liberated, but are we in a place where respectability politics doesn't have the kind of weight that it used to? And is it, as a corrosive a feature in our society that people think it is?
I would say that varies from community to community and from environment to environment. So when you look at like the corporate environment, for example, sure, there is a measure of respectability politics that millennials are coming in and challenging to such a degree. And because the type of work that we're introducing is so disruptive, we kind of have carved out a space to do it. And because it's happening in that space, it makes us wonder, well, why can't we do it over here? Why can't we do it over there? And the answer is that we can. And so I think that we are empowered now in a very different way to be authentic. This conversation, and I really believe it started in the 90s with Disney Channel movies and Nickelodeon. We've kind of been indoctrinated in a different way, our generation, about being different, standing out, and kind of celebrating that uniqueness and being the weirdo. And so that's something that I think we all embraced, our generation, and are continuing to live out. Now, as far as respectability politics in the family unit, in the Black family, I think that is a major hindrance that we still fight on the path to our authenticity, on the path to our creativity. Because in our formative years, from birth through 5, those are the times where we're learning that you don't question mommy, you don't question daddy, you don't talk back, you don't pout, you don't do this, you don't do that. Everything is no, 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 every time that you try to do what comes naturally to you. And you're dependent on these people and this structure to literally survive. So your willingness and speed at which you conform is what your wellness and livelihood depends on from birth. And so the way that we have to raise our children going forward. And I'm a mom, so I'm always come back to this, but the way that we indoctrinate our children is going to be transformative for the way that that respectability politics continues or is discontinued.
All right, Junior?
I definitely agree with that. And I definitely think that respectability politics has definitely taken almost like this, it's almost like a parent that's trying to teach you the best and parent you in a way that is protective, but deep down there's a lot of very unhealthy and detrimental effects to that protection. It's almost like trying to, how would I say it, trying to shield a child away from the truth in a sense, because you're afraid that that truth is going to harm them in some way later down the line. And I think we have to move away from what we believe that others are going to believe about the people that we're raising. You know, who are we to impose what, you know, someone growing up in their youth and into their adulthood, who are we to say what they should feel about how others view them? And that's essentially damaging too. Like, I'm just thinking about it in an artistic way. And you start creating art and, you know, you're learning about all of these different artists and, you know, musicians and people kind of give you a rule book and they kind of tell you the rules that you can play by. And then they don't necessarily tell you that, you know, you can go outside of that limit, that rule book, because if you do, then that's frowned upon. And it's not necessarily healthy because it creates a mindset that we have to just play by the rules of the people that are you know, raising us. And you know, it just kind of keeps everyone in a box, so to speak. And I think we should definitely be making not judgments towards ourselves, but we should be introspectively looking into why it is that we do that, and trying to make sure that we're having that dialogue with the youngsters really openly and honestly about how they feel they should be seen and how they feel they should be pushed, or which, you know, what's the direction that they want us to guide them in. Because I think after you get to a certain point, you kind of get stuck in you know, the mindset that you're supposed to be a certain way, and you don't want the future to just be stuck in what everyone else thinks that they should be.
Exactly. I think, you know, so much of that respectability politics and, you know, the overbearingness of a lot of families is also still rooted in that trauma of trying to protect young Black and brown children to make sure that they come home at the end of the day. And we still haven't figured out where the line is, you know, to ease back, because, you know, you just don't know what's going to happen at the course of any person's, you know, life during the course of a day, that things can turn on a dime. And we've seen that happen time and time again. But I do agree that, you know, it helps to understand that children are individuals as well, and that at some point you have to figure out how to engage them in a conversation, to ask them, you know, what it is that they need for themselves, as opposed to, you know, trying to impose, you know, your individuality on that person. It's a hard thing, you know, for adults to learn, because, you know, people, you know, teach the way that they've been taught in a lot of instances, and it's not the easiest thing for people to shake, I imagine. That brings me to another question that I have with regard to this idea about how we talk about mental health and how we're willing or unwilling to. What do you think about the differences in the way that men and women respond to their mental health needs? We know that, you know, according to all general convention, general wisdom, and an anecdote, that Black men just don't talk about their mental health. and that women are much more open to talk about their feelings. We know that, of course, again, that's changing over the past couple of decades. There are plenty of podcasts that are specifically dedicated to Black men and or Black women, focusing on men's and women's issues and creating a safe virtual space to have these conversations. Why do you think some of those differences still persist? Why are we not having these co-mingled conversations among Black men and women? Because we exist in the same households and the same workplaces, dealing with the same people, but we're responding in completely different ways in a lot of instances. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that we draw lines. Sometimes we draw lines in places where they don't belong in order to validate our feelings. Sometimes it's easier to say, well, you don't understand because you're a woman. You don't understand because you're a man. It is to say, we are experiencing the same thing differently. Or we are handling the same types of things that we're experiencing in different ways. And so in my research on how men and women are responding to trauma and day-to-day mental hygiene needs that are being avoided, I find a lot of similarities between the ways that men and women cope. There's avoidance on both sides. There's escapism on both sides. There is blaming, there's anger, there's all of very, very similar outer workings that may look different, but they're really the same thing. And I love this question because it really addresses this issue of the battle of the sexes that still goes on so strongly in the Black community. We have to overcome that. And I think this conversation about the similarities between our mental and emotional health struggles within the Black community, among men and among women, opens the door for breaking down those walls. You mentioned shame earlier, and I loved that. Shame is such a huge part of the issue here. And so the only way we break down shame is through vulnerability. I mean, Brene Brown, we could go all in on this conversation about the gulf between vulnerability and shame. But for both sexes, there's gonna have to be a putting down of the fingers and an understanding that we are all collectively having this human experience. And in the Black community, we are all hurting with some of the same things affecting each of us differently. Neither one is heavier than the other one or more important than the other one. And we have to work together in order to overcome it. So thank you for asking this question. It gives me more things to think about after we get off.
I heavily agree. Especially, I think even the idea, the stigma that men have, somehow shut off all emotion and they're just these tough, providers. They're Superman, and they don't have to, process emotions the way women do. And it's just a lot of that, the ideas behind that and the stigmas behind it have been damaging for a very long time, because I think that what it's doing, the finger game, the blame game, what it does is that it kind of pushes Black men to think that, well, my emotions don't matter. Therefore, that reinforces the fact that I don't really have to put much thought into this. I don't really have to display my emotions. You also have the idea that, displaying emotions is weak. And we have this, from depending on the family and the culture that you've been raised in, boys don't cry, and, reinforcing those ideas very, very early on, those are damaging, and they don't allow for Black boys and men to really express themselves in the same safe way that, women do, Black women. And even in certain situations too, Black women are invalidated all the time, by let's say the angry Black woman stereotype. You expressing yourself in a way that is actually healthy And displaying anger in a healthy way could be targeted as being, oh, that she's just she's just angry and chaotic and she's crazy. When in reality, you're being stigmatized, and it's like, that's not helpful, because it doesn't actually allow the conversations that need to be had around emotional maturity and just emotional expression. It doesn't allow those conversations to stick. And I think we have to do a lot of work, especially when it comes to raising children, that emotions are healthy, they're normal. That we can talk about them all day. It's healthier to talk them out. It's healthier to even act them out in healthy ways, rather than shutting them off and not feeling them and numbing them down and pretending that they don't exist. Because when we pretend that they don't exist, that's when the harm happens. And that's what we have to intervene there.
All right, good stuff. I think we're doing pretty doggone good here. So let me ask you a pivot to a much more serious question. Let's say that you encountered a person that you know that is dealing with some serious trauma, or you've experienced a situation that has been extremely traumatic. We have these ideas about how we categorize what depression is, that there's supposed to be these hallmarks, but in your experiences, your personal experiences or interactions with other people, what is it that you've experienced that depression looks like?
Oh, goodness. Depression doesn't have one face at all. And that's what makes it so insidious. Depression can be overworking. You have your high functioning depressed people who are achieving and going, and they seem like they're just on top of it, and they're in their flow, and the whole time they feel hopeless. And then you have, people who become lethargic, and it goes hand in hand with the anxiety. And you have people who can talk about the fact that they're depressed, and then you have those who cope by laughing. You have to check on your happy friends too, the friend that's always checking on you. And it's so difficult and painful, because there are so many times where when someone ends their life, you hear the people close to them say, I had no idea that anything was wrong. I had no idea that he was so sad. And the rates of depression and suicide climbed so much in the Black community over the last 10 years, in all age groups. And so we all know that, we all have that knowledge, but how do we identify when someone is struggling? And it can be very difficult, because we don't even know sometimes that we are depressed. I had to have a doctor tell me that I was depressed. I didn't know that I was depressed. So, it's one of those things where we have to get in the habit of practicing the self-care things along the way, and sharing those self-care things, and asking the people around us about their self-care things, and keeping each other accountable in that way. Because even if we don't know that you're depressed, and even if you don't know that you're depressed, these little things are what can keep you alive while you make your way to the diagnosis.
I completely agree. Depression does not have a face. It's just, there's so many different aspects of depression. And someone in chat actually said that depression is often rage. And one of the things about anger in itself is that anger is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many emotions that are actually linked to anger, that anger is usually just a protective factor of whatever else is following behind it. So with depression, you could have someone that is genuinely very angry and very irritable. And it's not that they're actually just angry. It could actually be that they're depressed, and they're trying to find ways to cope with that depression, and they don't have the modeling of a proper outlet to express those emotions. They may not even be able to identify those emotions. So it is very important that we continue to have open and honest conversations about self-care, because when we can see what works for other people, we can try that for ourselves. And if it doesn't necessarily work for ourselves, we can put that aside and try something else. But if you don't know, you won't do anything. You can't do anything because you probably just don't have the insight to do so. So it's very important to continue to have those conversations, make sure that we're, watching our neighbor and making sure that they're okay. Because for some people, as someone else said in the chat, masking is very real. Some people have gotten to a place where they're able to mask their depression because the emotions of someone coming and asking you, are you okay? That's a very common question that, we ask a stranger, hey, how are you doing today? Are you okay? And a lot of the times you don't get the honest answer because it's such a loaded question, and we have to decipher our emotions and tell someone else how we really feel. And there's so much shame and negative, spiral thoughts, involved in that kind of answer, that we just don't feel emotionally ready to answer those questions. It's just not what someone is emotionally capable of at certain times. So I do believe that making sure that we continue to have those conversations and not to, just think that depression looks a certain way, because I think that is very harmful. I think it allows for a lot of people who are depressed to be kind of, swept under the rug and just dismissed in a way, because they're not being seen. So it's very, very important. And I do hope that we continue to have the conversation and show the different ways that depression can manifest in someone's life.
Well, I agree, and I appreciate your responses, because I asked because I lost 3 classmates to suicide since high school. One shortly after high school, one during undergrad and college at the University of Georgia, and one earlier this year. As a middle-aged Black man in his mid-40s, decided to take his life because he didn't feel like he had anyone to reach out to. Now, each one of these people is the stereotypical outgoing, gregarious, person that everybody loved, that was friends with all people, was good at everything, and that people always called on. And yet, they still felt that they were all in a place where they had no one to turn to. And for whatever reason, that, ending their life was, the alternative to whatever pain they were suffering. And, this is a conversation that is coming from a small North Georgia town, right? And we're talking about beginning in the late 90s, when the first classmate, took their life. People were not talking about mental health and self-care, and they definitely weren't talking to young Black men about it, not in the way that we're talking about it now. And so I just have to wonder, what, kind of life that person would have if we were having, the kind of initiative to invest in people, back then as we are now, seeing the whole individual, all the people that, we've lost because, people weren't thinking about how to cultivate a sense of self and a safe space for individuals in every part of the community that, we're supposed to be investing in. As stated earlier, like some of those resources that we think are associated with mental hygiene are only reserved for certain segments of the population. And so that people just don't think about trying to reach out for it. And we wind up losing them because of that, or in part of it. So, it's something that, I'm regularly thinking about, because again, the students that I work with, especially, the heightened environment that we're in, post COVID, and with everything else that's happening recently here in the region, it worries me, because you can see students going through it, and you can see people going through it. You can look at folks and kind of tell that they're on the knife's edge. People just barely holding together, and you wonder, if they have someone or some organization to turn to. to, help them through.
I'm so sorry to hear about the friend that you lost this year, and the other friends as well. Um, just
Thank you.
absolutely.
It's just, it's even saying it out loud after years still doesn't sound right, because you're thinking about these people that you grew up with, who were, always presented as what we would consider to be stable, quote unquote, happy people. And, suicide and or depression would be the last thing that you would ever associate with any one of those individuals. And so those are the kind of things that also start to make you question yourself and whether or not you should be doing some sort of self-inventory. Because if there's something wrong with them, then maybe there's something that you need to be thinking about yourself, right? To help you become a little more grounded in the reality of the world that you're living in, and the way that you see yourself, and the way that you interact with people.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
I was just agreeing with you, but I will say that I think it is so important to take the conversation from being about them to being about me. Asking yourself, I think that's so valuable. Asking yourself, what do I need? And when we're having this conversation, I think, it's really important that we talk about the tools. There are tools that you can have in your toolbox, the things that you're doing on a regular basis for your self-care, for your hygiene. Those are tools. Meditation and mindfulness are two of the most important tools that I use. They've saved my life and the lives of countless people that I know. Because I value those tools so much, I created Crowned and Calm Co. last year to teach Black and Brown people meditation and mindfulness with systems designed specifically for the needs of Black people. There's a system for men. The system for women is being created now. The system for children will launch next spring. And giving them the tools to do this at home. This is something that you can do, that you don't have to put people in your business right away. You can deal with what you need to deal with on your own. It's not meant to be a substitute for therapy or for any of the other tools, but it's meant to be a gateway for you into your own wellness journey, into yourself. And feedback that I've gotten from Black men so far in the last year for the Black Men System King Vibes has been so outstanding. So many have told me that their depression, their anxiety, their day-to-day stress, all of that, they now have something that they can go to that consistently is causing improvement. So tools like that are available. There are things that are created specifically. There are programs to help match Black people with Black therapists. There are, there are running groups, and, for whatever you want to do, there is a group of people. There's the North Louisiana Black Creative Circle. Forgive me if I got the name wrong at all. But there are groups of people who are here. There are resources for all of us. And if you feel like you don't know anyone who you can talk to or don't have anyone you can go to, these might be good places to get plugged in.
Definitely. Junior?
I wanted to say that in the chat, you said you also need to make sure that they are tools you will actually use and the ones that actually work for you. And I think that is so important, because there are so many people that I've encountered in my line of work where, I'm counseling and I'm talking to someone and I'm giving them certain tools to try, and they're saying, well, that doesn't work for me. And so the next best thing to do is to find something that does work. Never give up on looking for a self-care tool or a some kind of outlet that works specifically for you, because that's what's important. It's not about what works for everyone else, because what works for everyone else just may not be what works for you, and that's okay. It's okay to take some time to look for a Black therapist, or it's okay to take some time and try different types of meditation. People have this like idea of what meditation looks like, and then they go into it with this idea that it's just sitting in a corner quiet for like 5 minutes and shutting out all thoughts, and they don't realize that there's so many other things that account for meditation. Like, it's not just that. And so you have to look into what works for you, and what is most likely to be reliable in your work, in your day-to-day life. Because for some people, like mindfulness is incredibly useful, but some people may not find that that it necessarily works for them in their busy lives. Like, just even the thought of it, they may be mindful in certain moments, but the idea of actively putting into practice in certain situations may not work for them, and that's okay, so long as they do find things that actually can be used and be practical and be practiced. And I think that making sure that people understand that the tools that they use should be used regularly, and not just on the spur of the moment when you're in the middle of a crisis, or having a panic attack. This has to be stuff that you can comfortably use on a day-to-day basis, and it's most likely within your self-care routine. So if you can utilize that and continue to use it and know that it works for you, don't reinvent the wheel. Do that thing, make it work for you.
I agree. I think that part of the bigger issue, once we come to the realization that there's something wrong, that we're trying to fix it. It's like, how do you work this into your program? Because we're still, in a lot of ways, on that hamster wheel that is our life. Get up, go to work, take out the trash, come home, stop at the grocery store, fill up a gas tank, and then go to bed and get up and do it again. Working in, whatever small element of self-care and mindfulness or meditation, seems to, throw a huge monkey wrench in a lot of people's schedule, including my own, because I'm always working usually until I go to bed on Friday night from Monday to Friday. It seems to be a terrible habit to break. Raven mentioned early in the conversation, the role that millennials are taking to kind of push this advocacy for self to the fore. And I can think of a handful of times through popular culture since the late 80s up until now, where we have specific instances of people of color engaging in therapy of some sort, and also talking about their own personal agency. I was wondering, do you all think that is reflective of the moment that we're in right now, post George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in January 6th, or are we looking at a sincere and substantive change in the way that Black and brown communities think about how to advocate for themselves, both on the political front and both on the mental hygiene front? Don't everybody speak at once.
I was going to let you go first.
Sorry. So I actually think that the pop culture is not just mimicking, like, it's not just commenting on the moment in itself. I think that we've actually been seeing this kind of come to a boil over the years, and like, it's just now really starting to kind of rear its head, and like, everyone is now noticing it and having the conversation. But I think, like you said, like, even all the way back and starting from the 80s, I think that this conversation has just started to kind of really trickle through and break through now more so than ever. And I know that the depictions of, like, let's say therapy on TV have been a lot more prevalent. And I think that that's very important. And of course, I can tell you all that a lot of the pop cultural references and the image of therapy, just seeing it on TV, is very helpful. That's not really how it goes in real life, guys. So just be mindful that it's very different in session, but I think that it's extremely important for people to see what that looks like or what it might look like. I think that having conversations about what it would feel like to just sit in a therapist's office and just be present in that moment and talking about your feelings and not necessarily just your problems. I think that's one of the things that we think, when we're going to a therapist, that we're just talking about problems, but just, talking about your feelings and being validated and seeing that on TV is especially important. But I think that the reason that it's being brought up in pop culture so much is because we know that it's almost like a symptom of everything else that's been going on, because we know that it's we're not talking about it enough and we're not bringing it to the forefront, but we know that it is important. And so to see those images on TV, it's extremely symbolic of the times, but I think that it's been boiling over for quite some time. I think we're going to continue to see it become more prevalent and maybe even a more realistic depiction of what it's like to deal with mental health and what it's like to actually be inside of a therapist's office and just, expressing those feelings and maybe even, talking those things out with other people.
I think that the depictions are lagging behind the reality. I definitely agree with that. And I would say that there are more resources available and more different types of self-care than what you might see in pop culture depictions and in media. So I definitely would say there is something for everyone, and I don't see that necessarily disappearing. What I see happening is a normalization of these types of conversations and this type of lifestyle. And I appreciate that there are so many different types of things that you can find on social media, like on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook. You're gonna see meditation groups for Black people. You're gonna see self-love groups for Black women. You're gonna see affirmation groups for Black men. And you'll get to touch and taste a and so I don't see a fizzle out. I do see that as it becomes normalized, there's no need to have so many conversations about it 50, 100 years from now. And the conversation becomes a little quieter because the activities are going on more regularly. That's what I see playing out.
And so in that process, we wind up developing better methods for dealing with family trauma, dealing with microaggressions at work, dealing with the crazy person who always parks beside you in the parking lot at the office and tries to ding your car on purpose, or doesn't clean the microwave in the office kitchenette. All those people. It gives us the material to make sure that we're dealing with those issues in a much more productive adult manner without letting them become additional burdens that we carry with us through our lives. Right?
Those specific examples. Are you calling somebody out who's listening?
No.
It felt very pointed. It felt very pointed.
It's a composite of people that I work with over the past 20-something years.
Right.
I've known a lot of those people. Unfortunately, there are more of them than I would care to admit.
We will have to talk about it in the office.
We will have to talk about it in the office. All right. So I have a few more questions before we pivot to the question portion from the comment section. But I want to ask specifically about the role of the arts first, or what you think the role of the arts can be. I know that we touched on this a little bit, But there's this famous quote that said, art should comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Do you think that, that is still an expectation of the visual and performing arts? And of course, bearing in mind the moment that we're in, or, are we still thinking about the arts as a strictly a form of entertainment, as a form of contemplation, more so than a tool for activation, whether it be activating one to move toward better self-help, or to make one a little bit more engaged politically or socially? Should art be challenging?
Yes, absolutely. I believe that in its nature, art is challenging because for me, every type of art is about validating that we are not alone in the human experience. And in order for an artist to be able to paint that picture, artists do have to dive inward, experience the vulnerability of putting whatever's going on in there out. And then when the experiencer of the art takes that in, what they're getting is, damn, I think that too. I feel that too. I went through that too. It validates that we are not going through this alone. And then it also has the juxtaposed sort of experience of showing you someone else's experience that's not yours, that you can't necessarily relate to. It validates the idea that none of our experiences are universal, no matter who we are. And so I really love how Alice Walton is using art in Northwest Arkansas at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art and the Momentary. They have entered a space of historic conservative energy and a very conservative and historically white culture, and introduced in that space world-class art and conversations about being trans in America, conversations about being Black in ways that are very bold. And so it's forcing this community to have conversations and to understand a narrative that's outside of their norm. So, but for those of us who see that and identify with it, for the kid who's being teased about his sexuality at school, when he goes to the museum and he sees this exhibit, what he's experiencing is, yes, me too. Thank God, somebody else. And maybe I can, open up and branch out in the same way. But then, the older conservative person who comes in and sees the same piece is challenged. So the answer to your question is absolutely, art should be, and naturally art is challenging to us.
All right.
Agreed. I don't think that there's necessarily a line where the artist is creating and they think to themselves, well, I shouldn't make this too challenging, because I believe that we're creating from the inner experiences of, our own selves. And a lot of what we create is from sometimes the deepest, darkest parts of who we are as individuals and what we face on a daily basis. And I think that naturally, when you look, in the past, a lot of art has been mimicked or mirrored by the times that they were created in. And so even with music, you see a lot of politically charged music that was used to spark a movement, or chant about freedom and expression and being able to be who you are or who you want to be. And I think that naturally it's just something that because art is so entangled with the human experience, I think it's almost impossible for it to never be challenging. I don't think that there ever will be a time where we won't need art to be challenging. I think if you're looking specifically for, art to just not be engaging, it's almost like, are you really alive? Are you really living? That experience, I think, is just natural to the consumer, but also natural for the artist as well, because it's not, I don't think that it's really a calculated effort to always challenge. I think that sometimes it happens naturally. And then there are some artists that take it a step further and make it their job to challenge others through their art. And I think that that's one of the most beautiful things about art in general, is that some people have that ability to kind of take and internalize the world around them and then externalize it in a way that is healthy and challenging. And, you know, it can be all those things above, where we're looking at it and we're like, wow, I really just don't know how this makes me feel. And that's powerful. Like, I mean, there's not that many other things in the world that can make us do that with just the sight of a picture, or, you know, in a 3-minute song. So it's very powerful, but I definitely do think that naturally art does challenge us, and it also comforts us in many ways.
You know, there's a quote that I begin all of my art appreciation courses with, from W.B. Du Bois, 1926, The Criteria for Negro Art. And he says specifically that all art is propaganda. And that, you know, in summary, that it's important to the artist to understand what the impact and power of their work is on the community that is going to be circulating in. And he further goes on to say, because he's writing about the Harlem Renaissance, that the artist has some sort of responsibility to the community that they're sharing their work with, that, you know, the art can be an agent of change in one direction or the other, and that it's up to the individual to decide how they want to move the conversation, right? How they want to help shape society with the work that they make. And I know that a lot of artists, you know, shy away from that because they don't want the responsibility, or they don't feel like they should be burdened with it, which is understandable. You know, people go into studio spaces to make a thing that is supposed to be reflective of themselves, and they don't necessarily want to be concerned with how other people are going to respond to it, and whether or not it's going to make people get up and do a particular kind of thing, respond in a certain way. But, you know, I think because of, you know, when I was born and where I was born, I'm wholly invested in understanding the power and purpose of art being an agent of change, to initiate conversations, right? To make people think about things in a way they haven't thought about it before, because, you know, the world has already been filled with quote unquote beautiful things for people to look at. You know, we need, you know, interesting and beautiful things for people to look at that will make them think about the way that they exist in the world. And that could be, of course, you know, two-dimensional images. It could be, you know, movies, it could be literature, it could be music. You know, that's what we're here for, is to grow, and art can be a good catalyst for growth. I think I'm biased because I'm an artist, but, you know, I think that, you know, the art that we engage with, we surround ourselves with, makes us, you know, better people in a lot of ways, right? I have one more question. Actually, I have two more, but I think we're running kind of long, so I want to let you get to your evening before we pivot to the potential questions from the chat. So let's say that you are at brunch tomorrow and you overhear a conversation from someone that is going through it. And this person is at the place where you were before you had your realization that mental hygiene and self-care were important. What would you say to that person? What kind of lifeline would you throw to that person, you know, in passing before you left that space?
So I believe that in that moment, I would definitely open up a conversation and just simply see where they are, you know, and just being an open ear to whatever is going on, and really listening to someone in itself is a very validating experience. I think a lot of people in general, when they go to a therapist, one of the things that takes them back is the fact that a therapist is, you know, validating a lot of the experiences that they've had. And so if I've had some of those similar experiences, validation, I think, would be the first thing that I would do, is validating that their experiences are real You know, there's nothing that they need to doubt themselves on. You know, what happened to you really happened to you, or what you're going through is really what you're going through. And making sure that they know that there are tools out there that can help you. You know, there are therapists, there's you know, healthy coping strategies. There's lots of different tools and aspects and people that you can talk to that can get you on the right track. And I would let them know that, you know, nothing is really impossible when it comes to working within yourself and working on yourself. And, you know, it's really all about honing in on the fact that the experience that they're going through, they're not alone. And it's just extremely validating to hear that someone else has gone through what, you know, what you've gone through. And also letting them, you know, giving them resources. I think one of the most empowering things that you can do for someone else that you know that is going through a hard time is to give them resources, is to give them an outlet, because a lot of the times they've already done the extent of what they can do. And so they are already at a state where they're feeling helpless. And so when you're feeling helpless and hopeless, you tend to kind of feel stuck and you don't know where to go. So by giving them the resources, you're diminishing a lot of the emotional work that has to be, the emotional effort that has to be expended on looking for other resources yourself. And I think that's extremely important when it comes to someone that's struggling. So I would definitely give resources, be validating, letting them know, you know, maybe even extending, you know, just extending a hand. Maybe I can help. Maybe there's a need that I can meet. And just being extremely open to that, being open to that experience. I think a lot of people, you know, I'm an introvert myself, so I kind of don't want to, I don't really want to have like a super long drawn out conversation, but I think sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes we have to kind of get over that and just really be there for people, because the world that we live in is, it's all connected. You know, we're all connected to each other. We're all living our own experiences. So I just would make sure that they felt heard, they felt seen, and they knew that they were not going through this alone.
Much of this, I think you always have to start by getting an understanding of where somebody truly is. It's so easy to make an assumption, you know, about what somebody needs on the quick end. But I think really devoting that time to hear where they are, to hear their heart, and then what I do for them from there depends on what they need. You know, some people really all they needed was for you to listen, and they're good. Some people need community. So giving them, you know, access to plug in, hey, here's my number. I have dinner parties once a month. I'll invite you next time, you know, and who knows who you could meet there. And some people need to learn and understand that they are creative, like they have access to creativity as an outlet and to be introduced to that. And so, you know, there really isn't like a one size fits all approach, in my opinion. It has to be a tailored response to the need of that person where they are now. And I really loved also what you said, Junior, about making sure that they understand they're not alone. And I see a lot of value in validating that it's a journey. Where you are right now is okay and beautiful. The moon, she changes constantly, and every single one of her phases is beautiful. And so I really would want to emphasize for that person that where you are right now is perfectly okay. And you can stay there as long as you need to. I'm not rushing you out of it. You know, there are resources, but do you want them right now? You know, that you can talk to people or you can choose not to talk to people right now. You don't even owe me this conversation right now. So just making sure that what's validated is, in addition to validating how they're feeling, validating where they are, and that they can listen to themselves to determine, you know, building up that strength of self to hear your own voice and determine when it's time to move on and what thing is right for me next.
Oh, thank you. So we want to end on well, not end, but pivot to the ending on a happy note. What is giving you joy right now?
Ooh, I got this. Okay, so what's giving me joy right now is me. I'm giving me so much joy. I have never been more in love with myself and my journey. I wake up just so happy to be me. And that's a victory for me, because I spent so many years really wishing I was somebody else, and not being happy with my own personality and my own thoughts. And so the thing that's bringing me the most joy right now is my comfort and freedom in just being who I am today, and the freedom to be somebody else tomorrow if I need to be or want to be, having no allegiance to previous versions of myself, being a canvas within myself on a day-to-day basis. That's giving me joy. Family obviously is always the obvious answer. They bring you so much joy, mine at least. And then just relationships and connectivity. I love talking to people and listening to people and connecting, and doing that, connecting with me and connecting with others is just making me so damn happy.
Cool. Junior?
So I think that I love that too, the family part and the relationship aspect. I definitely feel like I'm getting a lot of joy from my friends and my family. They've all been extremely supportive of my journey as far as going to social work school, and then also making music and creating art. And that's something that I feel extremely blessed about. And I feel so happy to be able to even, create. That's just something that's always given me joy, the freedom of expression, and to know that I am worthy enough to create, and to just feel that I can create and speak to people. And I don't know, just this whole existence is just giving me joy. I've come from a long history of not honoring who I was. And so now that I am who I am, and I can proudly say that and just be that, I feel like, joy just kind of comes to me. Like I receive it. It's just there. There's an abundance of it. And even through my busiest times, even through the times that I'm struggling, I'm able to see the joy in my life. I'm able to see what I've overcome and what I'm going to continue to overcome, because I'm just grateful for all of the things that I have in my life right now.
That's dope. That's what we all want to be, right? That's what we all need to be. I was driving to work the other day, and this sentence came to mind, that the world that we live in doesn't allow for the complex individuality that allows us to be our authentic selves. And every day is partly a battle to make sure that we carve out spaces that we can be who we're meant to be here, because that's the part of our job of being on this earth, to be better versions of ourselves so we can help other people be, the versions of themselves that they need to be. And I think that our conversation here is hopefully help some individuals, and will help other individuals that hear it get on that path. So thank the two of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. Would you like to take some questions from the chat?
I have time.
Sure.
Cool. So I think everyone can unmute themselves. That might be the easiest thing to do, maybe, if people want to ask a few questions directly. Speak now. About your piece.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
When y'all were talking, I came in a little late, but y'all were talking about masking and like giving honest answers. And someone said something about like when people ask you how you're doing, they're not really expecting a honest answer. I am 12 months postpartum, and I'm 36, and so people would ask me, "How's motherhood?" And I didn't shy away. I would tell them, well, it depends on what day it is and how much sleep I got, and they're just left like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
But I mean, that's real, because you look on Pinterest and Instagram and everybody's like, oh, it's amazing and this and that. No, it's not. I love my baby, but motherhood is not always that. But all that to say, like, I did not mask motherhood. I did that for myself and for other people. I feel like you should be honest about certain things. Great talk, y'all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But you know, that conversation, that ability to do that really does allow other people to say, hey, like, that was a different response than the response that I was expecting. Because most people just get a, you know, oh, okay. And, you know, they're just like, yeah, you know, it's great. Everything's going well. But when you really are honest about it and speak it, you know, from your own truth, people start to see that maybe they can also be part of their own truth. You know, they can divulge that or give that information to other people and it not be so strange. Because I think that when you ask someone, you know, like in the grocery store, they're just going to tell you, yeah, I'm good, I'm fine, thank you, have a nice day. It's just their platitudes. And so we have to kind of work towards allowing those conversations to be normalized and allowing those expressions to be normalized. And I think that that's great that you were able to do that. And I'm sure a lot of people were taken aback by that. I'm like, wow, like that's super important. Like I didn't think of it that way. Like it, you know, I never would have guessed. So I think that's a great thing to do. And I'm glad that you did that.
Yeah, Miss Davenport, thank you for opening space. Like when you do that, you create so much space for the other person to be honest and vulnerable, for them to think through before I ask somebody how they're doing. Do I really want to know? And am I invested in that moment? And also creating space to dismantle this idea of the Black superwoman, the strong Black woman that's not even a woman because she's not human. You know, when you do things like that, you completely open up a space to dismantle things that need to be dismantled and build things that need to be built. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments?
Hello. I wanted to ask what you all's opinion of supporting a spouse who has recently started counseling and was really, really anti, and you know, how to, I guess, because I've been begging for this to happen, to be honest. So how to support without, I guess, being overbearing.
Congratulations. I know what that's like. I've been there before. So just from my experience, I would say step one is to continue the same energy, like the energy of being supportive of therapy. And then, you know, like it's okay to hang back, like ask maybe one question, you know, maybe don't always ask how it went. You know, sometimes it's not great, like just creating space for them to own whether or not they want to discuss. I think that's an important thing too in therapy. One of the important things that people learn is to have that emotional autonomy. So it might be good. I don't know your particular situation. I have a ton of follow-up questions, but it might be good to just kind of hang back and allow your partner to come to you with their findings and the things that they're excited about, and let them go on their journey and invite you when they want you to be a part of it too. That's my thought.
Thank you. I basically have been encouraging it for a number of reasons. The relationship, yeah, but also just personal reasons, just observing things, and then, you know, men already not having language or vulnerability to be honest when they're struggling with things. But if you get close enough to somebody long enough, you know them and you're like, this isn't going well. So, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I would actually say to make sure that you check any expectations that you might have. You know, you have to allow the experience of therapy to work. You know, you have to allow it to just be what it is, and for that person to grow in therapy, because it actually takes a lot longer than what people think. You know, some people think or they have the expectation that therapy is this thing where you go for a few sessions and then you come out a changed person. And that's not always that's not a very realistic expectation. So make sure that you're tailoring your expectations to the reality of the situation, because sometimes change or the expectation that you have may not necessarily be realistic for the person. And I think that actually leads to a healthier conversation about therapy in itself. Working with clients, I've noticed that especially parents, they have a tendency to be a little overbearing with children that are in therapy, because they have it in their mind that it's just a goal and solution focused situation. And it's not, there's not like today we're going to deal with XYZ, you have homework, you come in, it gets graded. There's a lot of setbacks in therapy. There's a lot of, there's a lot of rapport building. There's a lot of different things that are going on in therapy. So it's important to make sure that you're patient, but also that you adjust your expectations on what the outcome may be of that therapy. So allow it to be their own true experience with therapy and just let the magic happen.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else? All right, party people. Well, I want to thank Junior and Raven for taking time out of their busy schedules to kick it with us and to share their insights and their expertise. And thank you all for hopping on to help facilitate this conversation and make it be the dialogue that I know that it would be. If you'll hang on with us, we have some resources that you may want to make use of, and we'll post some of the same information on the event discussion page, as well as on the Black Creative Circle of North Louisiana page as well. Thank you all for coming out. Stay safe, get some rest, stay hydrated, then get up and have some coffee, then get back in the bed and take a nap and watch reruns of Matlock or whatever it is you do to make yourself feel good. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Show me a man who can separate the heart and mind. I'll show you one who froze time and set the world free. Yeah, 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 yeah. Now follow. Now follow, 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 follow. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. I'm done now, artist. Said I'm done. I'm through hot. I can hear myself.